Good morning and welcome to another rather unconventional episode of The Angry Astronaut. Now, for those of you who have been watching my content for some time, you probably know that I am pretty conservative when it comes to theories and explanations that have an extraterrestrial or artificial origin. Now, some of my viewers might hotly disagree with that, but when it comes down to it, UFO sightings, no matter how well supported, no matter how many witnesses there are, even in regards to photographs of UFOs and UAPs, this is the sort of thing that I almost never report on because there just isn't enough tangible evidence. In general, I'm only going to explore an extraterrestrial origin theory if there is a lot of tangible evidence to back it up. That is to say, a lot of different sources of information, observational data, most of it astronomical, and every natural explanation up to this point has fallen flat, which in my opinion forces us to at least explore artificial alternatives. And of course, the majority of the scientific community doesn't believe in doing that, but I think, once again, once you have eliminated all of the other possibilities you need to explore, no matter how unlikely, everything that remains, and that includes extraterrestrial origins, artificial origins, that is. So that having been said, virtually every UFO sighting we have up to this point is either footage or photographs or eyewitness accounts, anecdotal information, perhaps from extremely reliable sources, but that doesn't mean that they're solid. It doesn't mean that what they saw is to be interpreted as extraterrestrial or artificial in origin. As one of my favorite science fiction writers, William Gibson, once wrote, people see, and if they see these things, that doesn't mean that they're actually there or that they are what they appear to be. However, the Pentagon has come out with a report recently, co-authored by Dr. Avi Loeb, and that in itself is significant. Avi Loeb was the former head of the astrophysics department at Harvard University, and some would regard him as a believer, that is to say, somebody who does explore artificial extraterrestrial origin possibilities, something that very few scientists do, and he co-authored this report. Now, 10 years ago, the Pentagon wouldn't have let him anywhere near a report like this, but this is an official assessment of what we've been seeing, these UAP phenomena and what it might be, exploring extraterrestrial artificial theories. In other words, if what we are seeing right now is indeed the work of another civilization from another planet, what are we really seeing? How do we explain what we are seeing? And are we also seeing technology that seems to defy the laws of physics? Oh yeah, and real quick, in less than 2 weeks, I will be departing for Alabama to go tour the Dynetics facility and to learn about their Alpaca HLS system. I have raised about 70% of the money needed for this trip. Thank you so much for your generosity. If you would like to contribute to this so that I don't end up even further in debt as a result of going there, I'm going there regardless, but if you'd like to contribute to this trip and also to my upcoming journey to Boca Chica, the links are in the description. Let's get on with the story. The study begins with a brief discussion of Oumuamua, which, in my opinion, is the most compelling piece of evidence that we have to prove that we are not alone in the universe and there is extraterrestrial technology surrounding us in our everyday lives. So the discussion of Oumuamua pretty much focuses on why this object was regarded as being artificial in the first place. And for those of you who have seen my previous videos about this topic, and especially for those of you who haven't, I have them linked at the end of this video. But as you can see right here, one of the most mysterious things about Oumuamua was the fact that it appeared to accelerate out of our solar system, and this was confirmed with multiple astronomical instruments. So this is something that we have a great deal of data on, and this acceleration was completely inconsistent with an asteroid or virtually any other type of astronomical phenomena that we have ever observed. Yes, it might have been a comet because cometary outgassing creates similar types of acceleration. However, the object was kept under very close observation during this period and never demonstrated the slightest whiff of cometary outgassing, so that explanation was also debunked. There is no astronomical object that we have ever seen or have even considered as theoretically possible that could have created this sort of phenomena. And by the way, that's one of a number of very strange things about Oumuamua. Once again, if you want more details about this, my videos are linked at the end of this one. However, in this report, a couple of other facts recently discovered were also pointed out, indicating that Oumuamua may indeed have been artificial. For example, quote, 3 years later, Pan-STARRS, which is a sky survey, discovered a definitely artificial object, namely NASA's rocket booster 2020 SO, which exhibited similar behavior with an extreme shape, a push by the solar radiation pressure, and no cometary tail because its thin walls were made of stainless steel. In other words, if Oumuamua were a natural object and only solar radiation pushed it out of the solar system in the way that we observed it, it would have to be made out of extremely lightweight metals and hollow, which is, of course, a completely absurd notion. The report goes on to say that on March 9, 2017, 6 months before Oumuamua's closest approach to Earth, a meteor-sized interstellar meteor collided with Earth. Surprisingly, IM-2, this meteor, had an identical speed relative to the Sun at large distances and an identical heliocentric semi-major axis as Oumuamua had. But the inclination of IM-2's orbital plane around the Sun was completely different from Oumuamua's, implying that the two objects are unrelated. Nevertheless, the coincidences between some orbital parameters of Oumuamua and IM-2 inspires us to consider the possibility that an artificial interstellar object could potentially be a parent craft that releases many small probes during its close passage to Earth, an operational construct not too dissimilar from NASA missions. This is the kind of thing you would never see in a Pentagon report 10 years ago, and yet here it is in front of us in black and white. But keep in mind, this is a draft report that has yet to be peer-reviewed. Once it is peer-reviewed, I'm sure there's going to be plenty of people in the scientific community that are going to completely scoff at the notions that are put forward in this report, and the media is going to report, it's official, UAPs are not alien. But regardless, the ideas that are being put forward here are the kinds of things you would never see coming from the Pentagon before. And keep in mind, this was co-authored by a Pentagon official. The report goes on to speculate just what in particular these objects might be. Quote, these dandelion seeds could be separated from the parent craft by the tidal gravitational force of the Sun or by maneuvering capability. A small ejection speed far away could lead to a large deviation from the trajectory of the parent craft near the Sun. The changes would manifest both in arrival time and distance of closest approach to Earth. With proper design, these tiny probes would reach the Earth or other solar system planets for exploration as the parent craft passes by within a fraction of the Earth-Sun separation, just like Oumuamua did. Astronomers would not be able to notice the spray of mini probes because they do not reflect enough sunlight for existing survey telescopes to notice them if they are on the 10 centimeter scale of CubeSats or smaller. In contrast, the radar signatures of a meter-class object would be detectable with our deep space radars and space fence, much like IM-2 was out to beyond geosynchronous orbit at an altitude above 36,000 kilometers. Such objects could also become optically detectable as they get close to Earth, especially if they create a fireball as a result of their friction with air. Equipped with a large surface-to-mass ratio of a parachute, technological dandelion seeds could slow down in Earth's atmosphere to avoid burnup and then pursue their objectives wherever they land. Current radar coverage of the majority of first world countries gives detectability of this high area to mass objects down to a few centimeters depending on material, making detectability possible. So it's important to note that Dr. Loeb is pointing out that we have the technology, at least in theory, to detect these sorts of things as they descend to Earth, assuming that they're actually there, but we haven't carried out a detailed enough survey of objects of this size to determine how many of them may be acting a bit unusual as opposed to ordinary meteors, and that a more detailed survey is needed, which is, by the way, what his organization, Project Galileo, is supposed to do. The report then goes on to ask a very important question. Why are they here? Quote, in analogy with actual dandelion seeds, the probes could propagate the blueprint of their senders. As with biological seeds, the raw materials on the planet's surface could also be used by them as nutrients for self-replication or simply scientific exploration. Let's hope it's the scientific exploration thing and not that these guys are looking to propagate themselves on our planet. But the report goes on to say, quote, it is important to note that given the timescales associated with the propulsion scheme discussed here, it is unreasonable to assert that the intention of any such probe launched in the far distant past has anything to do with the human species. More likely, and similar to NASA's missions, the goal would be scientific and exploratory in nature. It is likely that any functional devices embedded in the Earth's atmosphere are not carrying biological entities because these would not survive the long journey through interstellar space and its harsh conditions, including bombardment by energetic cosmic rays, X-rays, and gamma rays. Interstellar gas and dust particles deposit a kinetic energy per unit mass that exceeds the output of chemical explosives at a speed of tens of kilometers per second. However, technological devices with an artificial intelligence can be shielded to withstand the hazards of space, repair themselves mechanically, and even reproduce given the resources of a habitable planet like Earth. With machine learning capabilities, they can adapt to new circumstances and pursue the goals of their senders without any need for external guidance. As argued by John Van Neumann, the number of such devices could increase exponentially with time if they self-replicate. The paper goes on to explore why such objects would target Earth in the first place, and this is very interesting as well. For example, if they are using fairly conventional propulsion systems, they may require liquid water in order to refuel, and it's been known for many millions of years that liquid water is extremely abundant on our planet, and this is supported by the data. Quote, the interstellar meteor IM-1 had an estimated diameter of 0.45 meters and a velocity of 60 kilometers per second, but it was detectable when it burned up within the atmosphere of the Earth. The estimated detection rate for meter-sized interstellar meteors is at least 0.1 per year. In other words, we detect at least one per decade. This implies that 8 times 10 to the 34th power IM-1-like objects are bound by the thin disk of the Milky Way. However, if such objects were targeted towards habitable zones containing planets, the required number of such objects is merely 4 times 10 to the 24th power. Obviously, still a huge number of objects, but over 10 10 billion times less if these things are being targeted as opposed to hitting us at random. That is a huge number and something that should be seriously considered. How likely is it that interstellar meteors are just hitting us at random as opposed to artificial interstellar objects that are targeted towards us? And it gets even more interesting than that. For example, Oumuamua just happened to pass within the habitable zone of our solar system with a distance of 0.2 astronomical units from Earth. If this happened completely at random, it suggests that there are 20 billion times more of these objects in our galaxy as opposed to probes that may be directly targeted on our planetary system. Now, once again, keep in mind that we have already detected another interstellar object, an interstellar comet, that didn't come anywhere near our planet and exhibited behavior very consistent with ordinary comets that we see within our solar system. And yet the very unusual one happens to pass very close to Earth, exhibits all kinds of unusual features, and there would have to be 20 billion times more of them in the galaxy if this happened purely by chance. Once again, this doesn't seem very likely, and an artificial explanation is becoming more and more possible the more data we gather. But this paper, by the way, is entitled Constraints on UAP, and so Dr. Loeb is very careful to point out the various sorts of characteristics that high-velocity, high-maneuvering objects should exhibit while we observe them. And if we don't detect anything like this, it should call our entire observation of such an object into question. Quote, "There is also an ionization, an associated radio frequency signature from such an object moving through the atmosphere. Studies into supersonic and hypersonic vehicles provide a good basis for comparison. While the ionization density depends on the altitude, shape, material, and velocity of the object in motion, some limits can be derived on when a signature would be detected, implying a limit to the object's motion prior to the fireball threshold. In particular, ionization at high velocities lead to an increase in radar reflectivity along the ionization edge of the object and along the ionization trail." What Dr. Loeb is doing here is explaining the types of data that should come in conjunction with sightings like this. So in other words, if we have an opportunity to observe an object like this, not only visually, but also from something like a forward-looking infrared pod, which is very common on military aircraft, we should see characteristics like this. So he also points out that typical UAP sightings are too far away to get a highly resolved image of the object, and determination of the object's motion is limited by the lack of range data. The range is usually estimated using the flight dynamics of the platform and some fixed points in the scene if either are available. The error in estimating the range gives rise to a significant variation in the calculated velocity and is subject to human bias and error. Claims of objects exceeding the transonic and supersonic range should be evaluated against the above physics of ionization, radar reflectivity, temperature, sonic booms, and fireballs, all of which can more effectively and accurately bound the velocity and hence drive the range calculation. This will, in turn, when matched with the specifics of the sensor, allow for better estimates of the size, shape, and mass of the object in question. In other words, Dr. Loeb is pointing out that there is no solid, tangible evidence, at least that's been released to us by the military, that confirms that any of these objects have performed in a manner inconsistent with the laws of physics and thermodynamics. And until we have confirmed data to the contrary, and I'm not talking about observational data because once again, as Dr. Loeb points out, this is subject to a great deal of human error and human bias, we really should constrain our search to things that should behave in a manner consistent with the laws of physics as we understand them. Dr. Loeb is a very sober and level-headed analyst of these sorts of phenomena, even though he is notoriously open to unconventional extraterrestrial explanations. And I think this is a major development that the Pentagon is actually listening to an expert like this and and taking his work very seriously. Please smash that like, hit that subscribe. We are less than 2,000 subscribers away from that legendary 100K. Welcome to all of my new viewers, and once again, stay angry about space.